Hey, everybody. We are live. I am here with two of my favorite internet people and actual people. I'll go ahead and include you with all the people I know. This is Lori Spencer, who frequents Mr. Maupin's space up here. And we just decided to get together and have a talk about the topic that you saw in the title. We're wondering, can the populist left and the populist right work together? So to start things off, Lori, I just thought it would be interesting to hear how you got to know our crazy side of the fence.
Do you guys hear a banging sound? You hear that? That's my cat.
Oh, okay.
Hold on a second. Hello, kitty. She might make an appearance. Sometimes she just
That's okay.
wanders into the live stream and gets right up on camera and says, "Hello, world." So she's like that. She likes the attention. I was just telling Caleb, I don't know if he remembers, probably not, but I'll never forget it. When Caleb was with RT back during the 2016 campaign, at the time, I'm a libertarian, but I was supporting Trump because we had a terrible candidate that year. We had Gary Johnson, who was just awful. So I was supporting Trump. And Caleb was one of the few in media who was actually, giving Trump fair coverage. And I appreciated that. So I went to Caleb's Twitter and I would send him a nice tweet when he did a good report. And he would always take a moment to reply and say something nice back. And I thought, wow, here's somebody on the left who doesn't hate me. And so it's sort of like Maya Angelou. I think Maya Angelou said it when she said that people forget what you said, but they never forget how you made them feel. And I remembered that Caleb was kind. So,
Amen.
I love watching Caleb's reports on RT. I enjoy his live streams because I'm a history nerd, and he's always talking about really interesting history, a lot of hidden history, things I didn't know. So I've learned a lot from watching Caleb. And I always wanted to talk to him. And this is a great chance to do that.
I'm excited to be here. I didn't know this was the first time you guys had talked.
Well, face to face, yeah.
I'll mediate, I guess. The first time I ever heard that quote, Lori, I was in grad school and I just wanted to quit immediately. It was such a lonely experience. And I had a professor I was just not getting along with. And my mom actually quoted that to me, that Maya Angelou quote. She said, honey, she was always kill them with kindness. People will forget what you said, but it'll never forget how you made them feel. And I remember that teaching all the time because it's so easy to make a little quip and kindness goes a long way.
That's what I like about you. I'm going to say some nice things about you now.
Okay. Well, I'll take them.
I mean, you have such a positive energy, Tyler. Every time I've interacted with you, you're always so upbeat and positive and inclusive to everyone. And I really appreciate that about you. You get it. You get it, young man.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate that. Made me tear up a little bit. I don't know. I just feel when you're first learning this stuff, you know what I mean? Like you learn all these words, you learn libertarian, you learn communism, and then I don't know if you can relate to this, Caleb. It seemed like you exactly knew where you were, but then you start to dig in and you feel like you know more and more and more. And now there's libertarian Marxism. Now there's Marxist-Leninist Maoism. Now there's, anarcho-communalism. And it just became a joke. And, that's what drew me to you was that's not real. That's an internet thing.
Yeah. Sure. When it comes to, and absolutely, Lori, it's really good to talk to you. And wow, I'm really glad that we're finally talking face to face. I always appreciate having you in the chats, and I'm glad that things worked out. I'm glad you caught me on a good day. You liked my Trump coverage, because that 2016 election was wild. It was certainly wild to go around the country and talk to people. But as far as the libertarian thing, my perspective on this has really evolved in the last few years because, libertarianism, I had never really been confronted with that. I grew up in an area in the 90s that was Bush supporters and neoconservatives, evangelical Christians, and you were with them or against them. And if you were against them, you were in this category of people that were against them. And we were all kind of, there was this minority of people that were Democrats or at all left wing or not religious or critical. And it was like everyone who was against them was kind of in the same category. And I remember that's how the Bush years were, right? And you go to anti-war rallies, libertarians would be there, all kinds of people would be there, but it was mainly a left-wing show. But it was, that anyone who didn't go along with Bush was in the same category. But then I remember I was in college just as Bush was leaving office and Obama was coming in. And there were all these people at my college who were your typical neoconservative Republicans. They supported the wars, they supported torture, they supported everything. And just, the financial crisis happened, and then Obama got elected in a landslide. And then all of a sudden they were all libertarians, right? And I remember that. And it was like, and these people who had never questioned Bush's wars, had never questioned anything, they were all just libertarians all of a sudden. And they were saying the wars are wrong. And I was like, great. And they were saying, that the country is not really democratic. It's governed by this group of wealthy people that have all the power. And I was like, great. And then say, and that's because we're communist and we need to go back to real capitalism. And I'd be like, no. And so I just got into this mode where I like loathed libertarians. But it was almost projected anger. I wasn't really angry at them. I was angry at the communists because the communists had no interest in talking to these people. Right. I would say to them, look, there's all these people who are realizing the wars are wrong. And, the Ron Paul thing was happening. They're realizing the wars are wrong, but they're becoming like libertarians. So we need literature and we need to be able to engage with these people and debate with them. And the response that I got from the communists.
Oh, you muted yourself. There you go, buddy.
He got so excited he unplugged his mic.
That's what he does. That Maupin energy.
I
Put
do
it in
that
a bottle.
too.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. And their attitude was just kind of just build the movement, just support Obama, basically, maybe not officially, but just join the mainstream left, do the left wing thing. And these people, they'll come around someday. And I was like, no, these people are waking up and they're waking up wrong, from my perspective, at least. And there was no interest in winning these people over. And that was very frustrating for me. And like Atlas Shrugged was being pushed really widely on my college campus and the Ayn Rand stuff was being pushed. And I just had this, I had this desire to argue against it. And the left had no interest in doing that. And I realized now that's because the left was tied to the Democratic Party. They were taking instructions from the Democratic Party. Their function, whether they officially endorsed Obama or not, was to build support for Obama. Right. And so because of that, there was no interest in that. And so for a while, the early years of the Tea Party and all of that, I just had this anger at why are these people that are finally seeing that the establishment isn't so good? Why aren't they waking up and becoming a communist like I am? But then it gets weird. Around the time that you talked to me, Lori, 2016 election comes along. Right. And I'm very frustrated because Donald Trump is talking against the big banks and corporations, and the left is just doing this woke thing of white privilege and transgender and all of that. That's what the left is doing. And so that's where the left is going. And all of a sudden I get accused of being a libertarian. And I'm just like, how am I a libertarian? Like I believe in state control of the means of production. I believe in a government-run economy. But all of a sudden, that's the common argument. And as I started doing my live streams and all that, people start telling me I'm a libertarian. I'm like, I'm not a libertarian. And they say, well, he's always talking about economics and economic data. That's libertarian. And he's always talking about conspiracy theories. The government's controlled by people. That's libertarian. And it's like, it's libertarian to know facts. It's libertarian, and then I get more critical of environmentalism. I see that environmentalism is being used to hurt countries like China and all of that. And it's like, I'm just staying true to what communists around the world believe. And people point to that and say, well, that's libertarian. That's libertarian. And it's bizarre and then it gets even more interesting. I now find out that in libertarian circles, a lot of libertarians really like China. And a lot of libertarians really like Russia. And I'm like, well, wait a second. I thought that so I'm in this place where it's like February 19th, I'm going to this big rally in Washington, D.C., sponsored by the Libertarian Party. And, you know, hey, if you want to talk to me about economics and you want to stop these wars and you want to, you know, stop the degrowth agenda to hold back economic growth, and you do it in the name of libertarianism, I'll work with you to do it. So I've really kind of evolved, and who knows where things will be in the next 10 years, right? You know, things could change, but as of now, my position on you know, dealing with libertarians, my attitude toward libertarians is completely flipped. Ideologically, I'd like to, you know, win them over, but in terms of where we stand on the issues, I'm pretty close. I mean, there's not much I disagree with them on.
Exactly. And I'm so glad that CPI is involved in the Rage Against War rally next month. We have a great Libertarian Party chair right now. And I don't know if you know Angela McArdle. She's the chair of the Libertarian Party. I know you guys will be working together, coordinating your efforts, but you know, Angela gets it. She understands that communists are not the enemy. And I hope that she and I and other libertarians can work to educate our fellow libertarians, because there is a very strong streak of anti-communism in the Libertarian Party. Much of that comes from the right wing of the party. And I think our job is to educate. It's to show them that we're actually natural allies and not enemies. We may have disagreements on what kind of government we want and economics, but certainly on the issue of war, that's the big one that we can all agree upon. And I will say this for my party, the Libertarian Party is the only major party in the United States that's been consistently anti-war for more than 50 years, since the party was founded in 1972. We have always had an anti-war platform. We've always run anti-war candidates. Other parties talk a good game, but you know, even the Green Party let me down in the last 2 election cycles. They didn't run an anti-war candidate. I guess Jill Stein was the last time they had an anti-war candidate, and that was 2016, I believe.
Yeah.
So, you know, on the big stuff, I think we agree more than we disagree, and we need to be allies.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. What popped in my head is you can't always say the socialists are anti-war. You just read a history book. So, you know, it's I'm trying to think. There's so many different ways to take this. You know, I think to stay on the unity angle, like, who is the enemy that we both agree on? You know, I was going through different titles, and you know, like you guys said, I try to be a positive guy. I try to pray for Nancy Pelosi every time I have a thought to do the opposite, because I think she's just misguided.
She's praying for you. She's a good Catholic girl, and
she's very well guided on her stock decisions. So
she loves to tell you that at every opportunity.
But you know, I don't know. I hear people say, I guess what gets me, and Garland Nixon talks about this sometimes, that the dichotomy, like the left and right term, is now sort of, I don't know. In America, it seems almost completely useless to talk to most Americans about left and right. And it seems a way to get through to common Americans is to say it's not left and right, it's up and down. Garland would say that the traditional left-right label was about up and down. The left was about those at the bottom, and right was about upholding monarchy in the revolution. So I'd imagine you'd have all kinds of thoughts about that, Caleb.
Well, sure. I mean, I think about now, like, you know, I'm 35 years old. If I were 10 years younger, I feel like I would never have considered becoming a communist, because when I got interested in communism, there was no left in America. I mean, it was the 90s, and all the communist groups were, you know, kind of falling apart, and the Soviet Union had fallen and all of that. And I got interested in communism purely because I started doing my own reading, etc. But nowadays, there is this very, very widespread, big woke entity that is really something that I don't particularly care for, and that a lot of young people don't particularly care for. The cancel culture, folks that, I mean, their message is everyone needs to be poorer to save the environment. Their message is that, people in America have it too good. And their message is that we need to be rallying to support Ukraine and sending more weapons to the Ukrainian Nazis. And their message is that we need the government to come in and censor social media and shut down alternative viewpoints. And if I thought that was what a communist was when I was a kid, I would never have been interested in it. But when I was younger, it was a different time. And I understand why things are so confusing. And, I even spent a long time in American communist groups and was very confused. And it wasn't until I went to global communist gatherings and I met, the real communists in China and Vietnam and Angola and countries like that, where they are struggling to organize the economy and lift people up out of poverty. That's where I came across the communism that really, I was like, these are my people. This is where I belong. When I was a teenager, I got my hands on the writings of Anna Louise Strong. You ever heard of Anna Louise Strong? She was an American journalist, and she went to the Soviet Union during the 1930s when the USA was having a Great Depression. And in the Soviet Union, she wrote these glowing articles, and she talked about how America is associated with what she called motor-mindedness. We're like a go-get-em country. We go out and do things. And she said that in the United States in the 1930s, during the Depression, it seemed like the American dream, Americanism was over. People were starving in the streets. But the Soviet Union was where that American motor-mindedness was. Stalin was organizing the population to go out and build railroads, build power plants. We're going to raise our country up. And she said that the Soviet Union seemed like the most American place. And I remember reading that when I was a teenager and being like exhilarated, like, wow, this is really exciting to me. And I'm thinking, I'd like CPI to publish more material directed at libertarians. I'm thinking we need a pamphlet, and I've started working on it called Do You Believe in Growth? Because I think a lot of libertarians believe in economic growth. They want to start their own business. They want to go out. They want to have a new invention, a new idea. And that's why they're libertarians. And it makes sense they would be libertarians for that reason. And it also makes sense that the so-called left wouldn't be where they belong because now the left doesn't believe in growth. However, if you read, Frederick Engels, Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, if you read Marx's whole critique of capitalism is that it holds back economic growth, that it creates a situation where the more wealth that gets created, the poorer people get, where abundance leads to poverty. People are homeless because there are too many houses. People are hungry because there's too much food, where you have a problem of overproduction. And the more technology advances, the fewer people get hired. And that it has this cyclical problem, the boom bust cycle. And that the idea is you need a state that will control the means of production and enable growth to accelerate. And the other thing is that, another thing that's interesting is, I write a lot about Russia and China. And when I was more, critical of libertarians, I would always point to like both Russia and China. They raised themselves out of poverty. They became superpowers with state-run economies. And that proves this libertarian idea doesn't work. But somebody called me out one time. It was a libertarian, and they actually made a very astute observation, which I thought was actually very good. They read some of my articles where I'm talking about how Russia and China with state-run economies raised themselves up. And they said, that's true. They agreed with me that it's true that in Russia and China, the government is way more involved in the economy than over here. There's state-run banks and state-run industries. But they said, and this is very true, that both Russia and China have a very big middle class. And they do a lot now to support small business owners and capital.
True.
And that while they have a state-run economy, that state-run economy is constantly trying to facilitate and make room for small business owners. So, and it may be those small business owners that have given them the oomph to keep going, right? In the Soviet Union, kind of, fell apart as we know, because they couldn't do that. But China was able to adjust. And now if you look at Russia, they have huge state-run industries and state-run banks, but they also have this big middle class. And China has that as well. And so, 21st century socialism, if you look at the countries where it's been very successful, Nicaragua is a great example. I was there about a year ago. And I mean, if you look at Nicaragua, what has made them so successful is their again, state-run economy, but they have this micro entrepreneurship program where the state is constantly subsidizing and helping people open their own businesses. And I look at the, Deng Xiaoping theory and what has made China really take off. It's this idea of let's have a government that controls the economy, but then let's utilize the strengths of the market. And let's really take care of and promote those small business owners, those entrepreneur kind of people, to strengthen our whole society overall. And that's not
exactly.
That's not something that I think a lot of libertarians would be hostile. The idea that we had a government that went around helping the small business owners. If we nationalized Jeff Bezos and made Amazon public property, we made Walmart public property, we made the big oil companies.
How about Facebook and Twitter?
Yeah, exactly. We made them public property.
And YouTube.
I'll just take ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil's all I need. You guys can work on the rest.
But definitely then we had a government that was then constantly giving loans to people to start their own business, constantly putting on seminars to help people develop their own small business and all of that. That would be something I think a lot of libertarians would be very happy with. Libertarians aren't concerned about protecting the property of the ultra rich. They're concerned about their ability to grow and flourish and have their own idea and not get taxed into oblivion. Am I wrong?
No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. I mean, the thing that scares, I think, libertarians the most about communism or socialism is they're afraid that their private property rights will be taken from them, because that's so central to the American Constitution, the American way of life. And it's also important to remember that many of my fellow libertarians and people on the right and many on the left who grew up during the Cold War were propagandized big time. I mean, I'm a late Cold War kid. I'll tell you a little story from my own experience. And you'll like this, Tyler, because you're a teacher.
Okay.
When I was in school, we were taught an entirely different version of World War II history. We were told that the British and the French and the Americans beat the Nazis. They literally told us that. It was a lie. They didn't tell us about the great sacrifice that the Soviet Union made. We were told during the Cold War to fear communism, to hate the Russians, to hate the Chinese. And we were all propagandized so heavily in school and in the media. And when I went to college, it was still the Cold War. I was in college like 87, 88, 89, 90, just before the Soviet Union fell apart. And I was lucky. I probably wouldn't even be open-minded about communism today if it wasn't for one professor. I had a great history professor in college who was a communist, but back then you couldn't say it. He would have lost his job. He would have been... he would have lost everything. So you had to keep it on the down low back then. And this is Oklahoma. This is the University of Oklahoma. I won't say the professor's name.
Are you still there, Lori? Did we lose you? Well, I'll tell you this story, Caleb, while she's getting reconnected. Where I went to school.
Completely the opposite.
Oh, she's back. You're back. You cut out for us on a second, Lori. We missed the last thing you said was you had the teacher that was a communist at the University of Oklahoma, but he couldn't say.
Right. And in the class where he was teaching us about the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, he could see the confusion on my face. I'm like, and so after class, he asked me to stay, and he's like, is there anything I wasn't clear about? And I was like, I was taught completely the opposite in high school. This is all news to me. And he's like, well, if you'd like to learn more, step into my office. And he's got this file cabinet, like a bookcase with a lock on it. Because back then, if you had communist literature, you had to kind of keep it hidden. So he unlocks the secret bookcase and he pulls out some marks and some linen. He says, take these home. These are my books. These are important books. I want them back. So don't steal them, but I trust you to take them home, read them. This is not a class assignment. I just want you to do some research on your own. I want you to think for yourself. And I'm so glad I had that history professor. If it wasn't for him, I would probably be as closed-minded towards Russia, towards China, towards communism and socialism as so many of my fellow libertarians are today.
That's such a great story, Lori.
Mhm.
As a teacher, you often feel like I'm in the myth of Sisyphus and I'm rolling
Yeah,
this stone up the hill and it rolls back down. But I was reading a book yesterday and they said most of the good you do in the world, you won't even know you did it,
that's
you
right.
know? So
That's right.
that warms my heart to hear that story because,
You'll make
well,
a difference, Tyler, in a lot of kids'
or
lives.
we'll make some good trouble, one of the two, or maybe
That's
both.
right.
Lori, I was going to ask you, Caleb kind of talked about his a little bit, but is there anything else you'd like to share about your political upbringing? That's always important to know.
I'm an anomaly.
How did you
I
get where
didn't
you
f
are?
Yeah, I didn't fit in my own family. I was born into a very conservative home, you know, here in, the middle of America, here in the heartland, very conservative, state, and I was raised in Oklahoma, also spent 25 years in Austin, Texas. But here in Oklahoma, my folks were both Goldwater conservatives. They were Nixon Republicans and later Reagan Republicans. And even as a child, I was pretty liberal. I mean, my first political memories are of Watergate, and that made a huge impact on me from an early age. I realized that all presidents are liars and crooks, with very few exceptions. I learned, I grew up in the era of the Vietnam War coming to an end, of the Church Committee, the Rockefeller Committee, all these, in the late 70s, there were all these various congressional committees investigating the intelligence agencies, investigating the JFK assassination, the assassination of Martin Luther King. So, what I got from that as a kid was don't trust the government, which probably
Mm.
laid the groundwork for becoming a libertarian later. But I saw Jimmy Carter come on the scene in 1976. And as a little kid, I campaigned for Jimmy Carter. I was like, 7 years old, and I'm out knocking on doors. Hey, can I put a Carter sign in your yard? And even people who were pretty conservative let me do it because I was such a cute little kid. They're like, okay, yeah, you can put the sign in the yard. You can put the bumper sticker on the car. So I campaigned for Carter. And as a kid, I thought Jimmy Carter was, coolest thing since sliced bread. And he let me down. He let me down. So when I supported Ted Kennedy when he challenged Jimmy Carter. I'm a Kennedy file, as you probably know, student of the JFK assassination, love the Kennedy family. And I wanted Ted Kennedy to beat Carter for the nomination, but that didn't happen. And we ended up with Ronald Reagan. So I grew up in the Reagan era. That's when I was in high school, and George Bush came along after 8 years of Reagan and 4 years of Bush. I was so ready for a change in 1992 that I went out and did the dumb thing. I voted for Bill Clinton.
Slick Willie.
And I
Slick
knew
Willie.
better, guys. I knew he was a crook. I knew he was a snake.
But he was
My
so
first
charming.
job, Caleb will like this. My first job as a reporter, I was working for KEBC Radio, and I was the state capitol reporter. This is when I was in college. And I met Bill Clinton several times when he was governor of Arkansas. And he was always coming to the state capitol to do business with Governor Henry Bellman of Oklahoma. And I met him several times in the halls of the Capitol, and he was always hitting on me. And I was
Imagine that.
17. I was 17. That was before I knew, of course, of his penchant for young women. But yeah, he was hitting on all the attractive female reporters. It wasn't just me. So anyway, I knew this guy was a slime, right? But I voted for him like an idiot in 1992. And then Waco happened. And I never trusted Bill Clinton again.
That was a game changer for you.
I lived in Austin when that happened. And, you know, Waco's just about an hour and a half drive from Austin. They're practically neighbors up the road. I was actually driving past the Branch Davidian church on I-35 the day that they set it ablaze, that the government burned it down on April 19th, 1993. I could see the plumes of smoke, black smoke in the air. You could see it for miles as they were burning those people alive.
The Democrats.
The Democrats. The guy I voted for. It made me so angry. And, you know, they killed, I think it was 68 people.
They killed kids.
And little kids.
Burn alive.
Kids. And they could have arrested David Koresh at any time when he was out for his morning jog or when he went into the town of Waco. If he was who they wanted, and supposedly he was, why didn't they just grab him? Why did they have to make this big show and murder these people in a church?
Right.
And they tried to tell us it's a compound. It's not a church, it's a compound. They tried to make him sound like it was Jonestown, right? Like it was a cult. And I actually got to know some of the surviving.
That's my libertarian friend John there, Lori.
Hey,
that's
John.
what he said. I put his comment up there.
And he was 9 and he figured it out, right? At the time. And yet the media was lying to us through the whole standoff, the 51 days. The media was totally lying about it and demonizing the Branch Davidians, trying to make it sound like David Koresh was Satan himself. And I'm not defending David. Obviously, he had a problem with young girls. So I actually did get to know some of the Branch Davidian survivors. There was a lady named Catherine Madison, Clive Doyle, some of the others. And there were only a handful who survived. They're the ones who managed to get out of the building by jumping out of windows, or in some cases, some of them surrendered, and they promptly all went to prison. Prison for, I think they got 7 or 8 year sentences, and it was just on illegal firearms charges because the government really didn't have anything else.
Right.
So they got them on that, but they locked them up for several years. And then after they got out, in the early 2000s, I had the chance to meet and interview several of them. And I came to understand Waco like I never did before. And you know, I realized now that they were, you know, kind of a kooky Christian sect, you know, offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventists. They had some beliefs that I don't agree with, but they didn't deserve to die.
No, they didn't. Just because Koresh had a problem with young girls. I mean, Billy Clinton had a problem with young girls, but they didn't fire, you know, Sherman fire tanks into the Arkansas State House there. So was that was that when you kind of went over to the libertarian side? Was that when the libertarian torch started burning for you?
Well, I was politically lost for a few years. I was becoming increasingly pissed off at the Democratic Party. You know, the Nancy Pelosi's, the Chuck Schumers, the Maxine Waterses, they all came in that great sweep of 1992, right? The Clinton years. They're the ones who, in my opinion, ruined the Democratic Party. And as the years went on, it was scandal after scandal and so much corruption. And so then in 1995, the Oklahoma City bombing happened. And
Another one.
That's too close to home. I was living in Austin at the time, but that's my hometown.
Yeah, a lot of
And
fishy stuff with that one too.
and that federal building was named after Alfred P. Murrah, famous judge in Oklahoma. He and my dad were close personal friends.
Oh wow.
Yeah, he's a friend of the family because my dad was a lawyer and he knew Judge Murrah. Everybody called him Fish. That was his nickname. Anyway, when the federal building was bombed, I just happened to be in town visiting my mother. And the blast, we lived about 5 miles from downtown. The blast literally shook me out of bed.
Wow.
It was so strong, rattled the windows. The whole house was shaking. My mom and I are like, what the hell was that? And we ran and turned on the TV set to see what it was. Was that a sonic boom? Was that there was no thunderstorms around? What the fuck was that? And it took 15 minutes to finally get an aerial shot from a helicopter flying over the Murrah building. We saw this huge crater in the ground in front, and the whole front of the building gone, and people just hanging off the sides waiting for a rescue. It was horrible. And it's right across the street from the newspaper where I started as a reporter at the Daily Oklahoman.
Wow.
So it was very personal for me. It hurt my heart. And I knew people who worked in that building and lost their lives that day. I know people who were injured that day, and they still carry those injuries, both mental and physical. So that was it. That was, I was done with the Democratic Party.
Well,
done with the Clintons.
I think we can bring that back around for something to Caleb to comment on, because I feel like at that time, Caleb, you know, if you put even the tiniest bit of tinfoil on your head, who were they focusing on at that time? It was whites inside the country, right? Isn't that who they wanted to go after? And now it kind of feels like they're moving back there. But real quick, before you sound off on that, Caleb, I just wanted to say, Lori, that I just realized from talking to you that Waco was also really influential on me getting where I'm at.
Really?
I remember listening to Bill Hicks at the age of 18.
Yeah, I knew Bill.
You knew Bill?
I knew Bill.
We could
in
talk
Austin.
about that
he was
forever.
Always around Austin in the 80s and 90s.
But his bit about Waco, he said, he said I've seen with my, he said, I was there. They fired fire into those buildings.
Yeah.
And I was at College of the Ozarks, a Christian school, very right-wing Republican school. You probably know from Oklahoma.
Yep.
Like the last 5 people they've had there were like Colin Powell, George Bush, Sarah Palin. These are the convocation speaker. Newt Gingrich. I've got a picture of me and Newt Gingrich.
Really?
I need to make that my profile picture, Caleb. Me and Newt shaking hands. I asked him if he turned against Clinton because Clinton was cheating on his wife, and that was bringing down the moral fortitude of America, because I knew he had done the same thing.
Was that before or after he got
goes,
caught?
No. He goes, it's MTV and hip hop music. That's what he said. So that was pretty funny. But I watched a documentary on Waco. Caleb's mom's the librarian, so he knows. Even the librarians at the most conservative Christian school in the country they got a stash, and they had a documentary on Waco down there. And I took it back to my room and watched it, and I was just like, I mean, it rocked my world. And then
documentary, do you remember the name?
I can't remember the name of it, but it was really good.
When they made Rules of Engagement.
It could have been.
Yeah.
But the other story about your professor at Oklahoma, I had one of my favorite professors at C of O. We had a literary panel, and I asked them what form of literary criticism they gravitated towards. And one of my favorite professors, sweetest guy, kindest heart, he said, I gravitate towards Marxist criticism, feminist criticism, and multicultural criticism. He got a letter from Jerry C. Davis, the president, that said, if you ever mention Marx's name on this campus again, this is in 2010. Wow. He goes, you'll immediately be fired. Wow. And he said, all right, see you later. And he teaches at Oklahoma State now.
Does
So,
he really?
yeah, so he went the other way
Sweet.
of your story there. But what do you think
Sweet.
about that, Caleb, about the Biden administration kind of moving back to the militia right, if you will, or they call it such?
I've had a series of thoughts while I was listening to Lori talk there, and in response to what you're asking, because a number of things come to mind. One of the first things that comes to mind is, you talk about the bias in education. I think that one of the biggest differences in red state versus blue states is the way they teach about, the 20th century, communism versus fascism. Because I grew up in a small town, rural area. Ohio is not technically a red state, but the area I was in was very, very conservative. And the way we talked about communism was communism. You had to be an idiot to believe in communism, because communists want everyone to get paid the exact same wage, no matter how hard they work. And they don't believe in God, so they're satanic. And, you have to be an idiot to be a communist. But fascism and Nazi, well, Hitler made the trains run on time, and we were so mean to Germany after World War II. And yeah, obviously Hitler killed millions of people. The Holocaust is bad, but it's kind of an understandable mistake. And I've noticed that in
Makes my head hurt.
In blue states, though, they teach the opposite, right? In New York City, this is a very, very Jewish city. You ain't teaching that, you know what I mean? They teach the opposite. And because, the Communist Party was such a big deal here, I mean, most people in New York City have, if you've been here for several generations, you've got a grandfather or somebody who was around the CPUSA, like the city council seats during World War II in Harlem, both of them were Communist Party seats. So you can't teach that, right? So they teach, well, it's the opposite. It's that communism is, well, obviously it doesn't work and it's evil or whatever, but it's an understandable mistake. They had good ideals. They were against racism, but fascism is, that's pure evil, hate, bigotry, and that's kind of the difference in kind of red state, blue state. And it's interesting because it's like you meet people from red states, they can't understand how anyone would possibly be a communist. You meet people from blue states, they can't understand why anyone could possibly like Donald Trump, because he sounds like a fascist. So therefore, and that this is just this interpretation of history. This is kind of a difference, and I've noticed that. And then that points me towards something deeper, which is that if you go back further, I mean, we're talking, you go way back, in Oklahoma, there was an event in 1917 called the Green Corn Rebellion. Yeah.
I love that you know about that.
Well, the only reason I know about it is because I was in the Workers' World Party for 8 years. And the founder of the Workers' World Party, Sam Marcy, he had a pamphlet called The Bolsheviks in War. And it ends with the Green Corn Rebellion and documenting, and he called that the ideal anti-war movement. He's talking about what kind of anti-war movement do we need. He's criticizing the pacifists of the 1980s that were marching against nuclear weapons. And he said the Green Corn Rebellion, that's what we need. He ends by hailing the Green Corn Rebellion. And that was in Oklahoma. And it was multiracial. I would love to
read that paper if you could send it to me.
Sure. And it was multiracial. I mean, it was low-income white people. It was Native Americans. It was black people. And they united into one group. And when the government said, we're going to draft you all and send you to fight in World War I, they got their shotguns and their rifles and they said, no, we're not. And they took up arms against the people. Yeah, they took up arms against the American government. I mean, they turned their guns around. They made an imperialist war into a civil war, which is what, the Bolsheviks and Lenin had said you're supposed to do, ideally. So, you read that. Obviously, I don't advocate anything illegal, but that was a big thing. And it's like, if you look at it, Kansas also used to be a stronghold of socialist thinking. Earl Browder, the founder or the big leader of the Communist Party in the 1930s, his nickname was the Man from Kansas. That's what they called him. He was the Man from Kansas. His campaign election theme song was the Man from Kansas. They played up that he was from Kansas. They even had a parade, where they had William Z. Foster, who was an Irish American from Philadelphia. They had him holding a big hammer. And then they had Earl Browder, because he was from Kansas, a farming state, holding a big sickle. And the two of them were like the symbol of the American working class. Earl Browder and William Z. Foster, the hammer and the sickle. And you look at that, and the more we get into this, things are much more complicated. I remember, as I was really reading a lot of communist literature, I read about the Teamsters strike in Minneapolis, 1934, where the Teamsters, led by communists, they went on strike, they took over the city. And I remember I went home, I was in college, to Thanksgiving dinner with my grandparents and with some distant relatives that are about the same age as my grandparents. And I said, I heard there was like a Teamsters strike in 1934. And my grandparents and they're my distant cousins that were also in their 80s, they started opening up about the labor movement in the 1930s and the strikes in Akron, Ohio, among the rubber workers and the militancy going on there, and how, you know, back in the 1930s, strikes and working class organizing and occupying your factory and sitting down, that was something people in, you know, quote unquote red states and small towns did all the time. You know, it really wasn't until World War II and then the post-World War II economic expansion, we got this idea that only these pointy-headed New York City intellectuals do that kind of thing, right? You know, that was actually, it was considered to be kind of a common thing, you know, for working class folks. If they weren't getting the wages that they wanted, they would occupy their factories. They would sit down. You hear about the, you know, when they
bring
would
it back.
You know, the idea that class struggle is something, is this foreign concept, or it's something, that's kind of, that's something that's very new. And that the new left of the 1960s, in a lot of ways, it did a lot of damage, and it made sense at the time, because the U.S. economy was booming. Average Americans were saying, love it or leave it. You know, we've never had it so good. Let's not mess this up. And it was kind of your middle class folks, you know, your privileged middle class kids who didn't want to do a very working class thing and put on a uniform and go to Vietnam. You know, the military service is not a fun thing, especially if you've had more of a coddled upper middle class existence, you know. And so appealing to pacifism among more middle class folks, that was the strategy the communists employed in the 1950s and 60s up into the 70s, because it was what worked. Average Americans didn't want to hear it. But things have changed, and that's not the history of American Marxism and revolution, and that's not the history of the American working class. That's just kind of a short period. And then we also know that the CIA and the intelligence agencies, they caught on to this, and they funded the hell out of this kind of fake leftism, this middle class alienation. Susan Sontag and Hannah Arendt and all this stuff, you know, kind of reinventing socialism not to be a populist ideology for the broad masses of people against the corporations and banks, but instead making socialism the ideology of middle class intellectuals who don't want to conform to the mob. And the more you look at all of that, like, if we want to go back to what real Marxism is about when the Communist Party was strong, and if you want to go back to, you know, the Marxism that, you know, that they have in Venezuela or Cuba or Vietnam or China, that Marxism is a lot more like what used to exist, and not like this new left stuff. And the reason that things have gotten so weird politically is we've gotten to the point that there has just been such a break between what communists internationally believe, right? Communists internationally have updated their beliefs. They believe in having a market sector. They believe in micro entrepreneurship programs. They believe in religion. You know, in Nicaragua, the government, the slogan that's painted everywhere is Christianity, socialism, and solidarity, right? So the global communist movement has grown up and adjusted, right? And on the other hand, leftism in the West has completely detached from international communism and turned into this vehicle for, you know, keeping the Western world in line and trying to impose degrowth to stabilize capitalism. That we're in this weird situation where, what am I? Am I left or right? Well, I'm an anti-imperialist. That's what I am. I'm against the big banks and corporations and their corporate state that is trying to set up a low-wage police state in this country right now. And if libertarians are against it and Russia and China are against it, I'm with them. So there you go. That's where I stand.
Awesome. I love it. Lori, you're muted. I know we just have Caleb for about another 15 minutes or so. There's two questions I wanted to ask. I feel we should give the people a little bit of what they want, just a little bit red meat. We'll hide it in here. So, Lori, where do we disagree? Let's hide it. Let's sandwich it. Okay.
Boy, you know, the more I listen to Caleb and you and others talk about your brand of American communism, I really don't find a lot of significant points of disagreement, to be honest with you. Here's my concern, though, and I'm sure it's echoed by many libertarians, is it sounds good in theory, right? But I don't believe that that nationalizing industries or creating more government or even having social, I'm for Medicare for all, but I also have serious concerns about it. And here's why. I don't think that it can work when you have a government that is as corrupt as our government currently is. It won't work unless you have honest public servants and you have an honest government, which is what we all want. But, in my mind, that's why the Soviet Union fell, was it became like a lot of socialist countries eventually became deeply corrupt. And that, in my mind, led to its downfall. Yes, there was Western meddling, of course, trying to destroy them, but they kind of destroyed themselves with their own corruption. Am I wrong?
Well, from what I've learned, I don't think Caleb would disagree with that. And really, where I'm at, how I got here was I just wanted to find people that would actually do this and not
Mm,
sell it out, not sell out the working class. I got
exactly.
here. I kind of like how Marxist Leninism, like, they act like it's a formula, like 2 + 2 = 4, and then you just kind of like you weasel it a little bit in America and make it work in America, and then it'll work. It's just a science, But what the reason spirituality is such a big part of my channel is I'm kind of there with you, Lori, in a way. It comes down to, do you trust the people running this thing? And that's a question I've always had for Caleb.
We Gen Xers are a very cynical, distrustful generation, and for good reason.
We hope there'll be mechanisms within the party so that the right people rise to the top. But at the end of the day, I mean, I get where you're coming from. It's a spiritual thing. Do these people have their heart in putting working class people first?
I could count the members of Congress that I trust on one hand.
I think that's more than
and they're
me.
all Republicans. Libertarian Republicans, guys like Rand Paul, Thomas Massey. Those are my guys. Ron Paul was my representative from the 14th District of Texas for his 6 terms in Congress. And he served us so well. And you were asking me earlier, and I got on a long-winded tangent about Waco, and I didn't answer you, but Ron Paul brought me to libertarianism in the early 90s when he was my representative. I would listen to his speeches, and I really liked what he had to say. And I was like, yeah, I agree with that. And by 1996, after Waco, after Oklahoma City, after I was done with the Democrats, I discovered the Libertarian Party. They had a wonderful candidate back then, a guy named Harry Brown, who's now deceased, but I encourage people to go look up some of Harry Brown's speeches. That man was based. He was the best candidate the Libertarian Party ever had. And since then, we just haven't been able to run a really good candidate, which is unfortunate. I feel like right now, being that we are the 3rd largest party in the United States, and that all the polls show that if 2024 is going to be a matchup between Trump and Biden, that I think it's 57% of Americans would vote third party or independent. All they need is a good candidate. Everybody's waiting for a good candidate to emerge. And I hope the Libertarian Party will be the party to bring that candidate, because we're already on the ballot in all 50 states, which is very hard to get. We have the funding and the party framework to really make a difference. And so the question is, who is worth running in 2024? My money's on Tulsi Gabbard.
There you go. We all like Tulsi Gabbard over here. I know for me, because I don't think libertarians they're not anarchists. They're not completely against the state. They're just for a very limited state. And
some
I know
are anarchists.
Some are. Yeah, I know it's a big
all
tent.
over the place.
I know it's a big
Libertarians
tent.
argue among themselves like communists.
My favorite question for like anarcho-libertarians, I guess, would be just like, who creates the state? They're like, you need to get rid of the state. You got to get rid of it, and then everything will be fine. I go, well, who created it? Capitalists created it for themselves. So
those
that's
founding
what clicked
fathers
for me.
We so adore and revere.
Yeah, the only way. I mean, what clicked for where I'm at, I'm always open to learning more, but it was like the only way to oppose their state is a workers' state. But
well,
that's just me.
Caleb brings this up a lot when he talks history, is that the American revolutionary model of fighting a revolution to free ourselves from British imperialism, from the crown, that was the inspiration for pretty much every communist revolution around the world. And then, like Lenin, he wanted good relations with the American government, and we slapped him away. We said, no, we're not going to recognize you diplomatically. Same with, I believe, was it Mao? Also tried to have relations with the United States, good relations. That didn't work. Ho Chi Minh had reached out to Truman's administration, I believe.
Yeah, he
Is that
quoted
correct?
the Declaration of Independence, didn't he?
He sure did.
Yeah.
They admired what we did here, and then we treated them so poorly, just as we turned on them after World War II, and our ally in that war suddenly became our enemy. And I've been writing about that a lot lately, about Operation Unthinkable, Winston Churchill's crazy plan to use repurposed Nazi prisoners of war to invade the Soviet Union in July of 1945. It's insane.
Crazy.
What
They
what
were
were we
willing
doing?
to
What were
go
we
all the
thinking?
way.
All
I don't
because
know.
communism. And that's, yeah, perfect. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I know.
That's
I didn't want you to miss out on the opportunity. Caleb, you go whenever you need to, buddy. But I just wanted to show this. Lori wanted to share this history with you, and I know you guys are. What better way to come together after that fierce spat than a little history love between the left and the right here? So tell us about this, Lori. What's going on here?
It's just one of those, I think, misunderstood things about history, hidden history. When we have this caricature in our minds of fascism, and it's why we don't recognize it when we see it these days, I think, is everyone thinks that fascism, you have to wear a sharp uniform and be everyone's on the lookout for a little guy with a mustache screaming in German.
That was Gavin's comment from earlier. I thought you'd like that.
That's great. And so people think, well, it's not fascism if they don't hate Jews, right? Because fascists only hated Jews. And I'm sitting over here as a historian going, wait a minute. Does anybody read history? Not only did they hate Jews, they hated Poles. They hated Russians. They hated their own people, and most importantly, I think to this discussion was that they hated communists. They were driven, the Nazis in particular were driven by a fanatical hatred of communism. And so I did a whole thread about that because I don't think people understand. And I used actual Nazi propaganda. You can see it right there in their own posters from the 1930s. And some of these are just really sick.
Yeah.
And
that
really,
helped
really
me click too. I'm sure Caleb taught me that along with the million other things that I know. But
I'll show you some more.
why did they hate the communists so much? I never got taught that much in history class that the Nazis hated the communists. I just thought they hated Jews and freedom.
Yeah, it was like a 1-2 punch almost, right? After World War I, you had this like attempted communist revolution, right? I mean, the Kaiser at the end of World War I, the Kaiser, he surrendered on the land, and then he went to the Navy and he told the German Navy, "Now go and die, do a last attack, and you're all going to get killed." And the German Navy refused to go along with it. They rose up, they seized control of their ships, and then there was just like a revolution all throughout Germany. And, the Marxists had been a major party in Germany before the war. And so they, the Kaiser was forced to step down. Germany surrendered, and the Marxist movement, and there was kind of an uprising. But then the debate was, what kind of constitution were they going to write? And the leaders of the reformist Social Democratic Party, they said, we are going to write a capitalist constitution. We're going to just, meet in Weimar, and we're going to make the Weimar Republic. Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, they said, no, we want to have socialism. So the Social Democrats teamed up with the right wing, teamed up with Britain and America, and they murdered Rosa Luxemburg, and they killed, and Bavaria, a region of Germany, declared itself a communist government for a while, the Bavarian Soviet Republic. And so the German, new government led by quote unquote socialists teamed up with the Americans, the British, and the French, and they overthrew and they invaded Bavaria and they killed a bunch of communists. And so after that, Germany had the Weimar Republic, which was run by socialists, social democrats. It was run by the squad, basically. It was run by the AOCs. And, it was like a lot of working class people were like, the communists had their moment. They took power and they didn't create a revolution. And then the communists who actually believed in it, like Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht and the Bavarians, they killed them. So communism at that point in Germany was kind of discredited because they had their moment and they couldn't deliver. but there was a communist party in Germany because Germany traded with Russia and because Marxism was popular. And the Communist Party kind of became the party of the poorest of the poor. But then the Social Democrats were the ones kind of running Germany, right? And they were very anti-communist, very opposed to the Soviet Union. But they were saying, you know, we're going to have like quote unquote democratic socialism. They passed a law that like every major corporation had to have a member of a trade union on its board, you know, the worker cooperative stuff, all the same stuff, while they were telling the German people, but our main enemy is on the left. Our main enemy is those Russians and those Bolsheviks. And so it was like, first it was the Social Democrats came in there and there were massacres. May 1st, 1928, there was an armed parade. The communists, you know, marched. They had an armed parade with guns, and the German government that was run by Social Democrats said you can't do that. And there was an armed battle in Berlin. And so there, you know, the communists were quite popular, but it was the Social Democrats were the first group to heavily suppress the communists. And then fascism was like the second. It was like a 1-2 punch. The Social Democrats came first, the fake socialists, you know, that are preaching against communism in the name of, well, we're democratic, we're egalitarian, we're not like you hardline ones. It was you had the squad first. And then after a decade of poverty and instability and such, then the fascists came and they were the second punch, right? After that. And the fascists played on people's anger at the fake socialism. You had a decade of leaders who claimed to believe in Marxism that were making the country poorer and poorer and poorer and shooting workers down in the street and making poverty. So after a decade of fake socialism, you know, of poverty and suffering in the name of socialism, you had then the fascist movement that came in and said, wow, you know, aren't you tired of Jewish communists and Marxists that are making you poor? We're going to come make Germany great again. And it was just a 1-2 punch. And actually, many of the social democratic leaders at the last minute became Nazis. They were the same people. It was just, you know, they were careerists, they were opportunists, you know, and the communists who actually believed in it ended up in concentration camps. But a lot of the social democratic reformist leaders, they said, oh, this is where the wind's blowing. Oh, we love Nazism now. We're Nazis. And it was
just like what we see now.
Yeah.
Tax the rich at the
Democrats in the United States who are the worst offenders.
Absolutely. And I feel like that's an important thing to people to understand. But this is all capitalism in decay. When capitalism enters a long-term economic crisis. But I guess I just have two things I wanted to say. When you the whole thing about the government, right? A socialist government is very different than a capitalist government in that our government right now is an expression of corporate power. Joe Biden could care less what you and I think. He's performing for the corporations. He's performing for the rich and powerful, and they want us to be asleep. They want us not to be politicized. But if you go to Nicaragua, you go to Venezuela, you even go to Iran, where they don't believe in Marxism, but it's a revolutionary, anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist government. Those governments are really the expression of mass movements of people. They are an expression of huge mobilizations of the population. In Venezuela, in Venezuela, they have these things called Bolivarian circles, and every neighborhood, every community has this like association that meets once a week to talk about what can we do to help Venezuela be more socialist, right? In Nicaragua, they have these citizens' power councils. Every neighborhood, every community has one. In Iran, they have Basij councils, and that these governments, revolutionary Marxist governments, are an expression of like a huge upsurge of democratic participation. Things have gotten so bad in the country that all kinds of people say, I have to take responsibility. I have to get involved. And that involves, you know, getting into the streets, getting into politics, getting involved in their community. And the government that comes into existence is like an expression of that. It is an expression of a popular movement. So it has a completely different character. And I think that's the important thing to remember there, and that these governments are of a very different character, and that we don't want the American government as it currently exists. I mean, we understand that the state would have to change hands. I mean, you know, we would prefer a peaceful democratic transition to socialism, but not only would it involve a change in the economy, but you'd get rid of the FBI, you'd get rid of the CIA, you'd get rid of the Pentagon. We'd have a new kind of army. We'd have a new kind of police force. You know, things would change, and they would be replaced with things that are an expression of a mass upsurge of democratic participation on the part of the population.
What did Lenin call it, Caleb? You dismantle the mechanisms of the state? Is that what he said?
And that you know, it's a struggle for state power, right? And that the nature of the state must change. And I think that's an important thing. And that when you have a state that's an expression of a huge mobilization of the public and a mass mobilization of the people, that's different than what we currently have, which is a government that serves the corporations that wants us to sleep. And then the other thing I would say is probably the thing, and I'm not putting this on you, Lori, because I this is probably not how you see things, but I will say, as much as I am open to engaging with libertarians, one thing I really can't stand is Ayn Rand. I hate.
I can't stand Ayn Rand either.
And I mean, and it's weird.
She doesn't speak for all libertarians, believe me.
She speaks a lot at length.
When I was in college, I had a librarian friend who had been in Vietnam. He spoke Vietnamese, he spoke Chinese fluently, and he was like politically far more advanced than I was. And he taught me a lot of things. But one thing he said to me, and I was an atheist at the time, and I hated, he said to me, Caleb, he said, you seem more like a Christian than anything else. He said, when I hear you talk about communism, I'm hearing Christianity out of your mouth. And I was like, no, you're not. That's right, but he was right. And when I hear Ayn Rand and her virtue of selfishness and, and all of that philosophy, that just sounds like Satan to me. That's just what it sounds like. I have to agree.
I don't like to see libertarianism associated with Ayn Rand because most libertarians, I think, don't feel that way about their fellow man.
This is from The Simpsons. It's one of my favorite clips. Ayn Rand School for Tots. If you've never seen this episode, you got to watch it. And this is the posters on the wall. Helping is futile. It's really good. It was a great episode. Yeah.
Yeah. But I also remember that same, college librarian who had been in Vietnam and had been in China. And he had PTSD from the Vietnam War. I mean, he had been in Vietnam teaching English during the Vietnam War, and he had, traumatic memories of the rocket attacks and stuff like that. But one thing he did tell me, as having spent a lot of time in Vietnam after the war and having spent a lot of time in China, I remember I was at an anti-war protest and he called me up on my cell phone. He said, "Hey, do you need a lift coming home?" I said, "Sure." And he picked me up from the anti-war rally. And I got in his SUV with him and we're driving back to my college. And he said to me, "Caleb," he said, "these people have nothing to do with communism." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He said, these are the people that would be against communism if it came to America. And he said, if Mao was in America, he would go to the poorest part of Appalachia, the poorest corner of Appalachia, and he would start the George Washington Bible Gun Club.
I love that.
That's what he told me. And I said, I thought, are you crazy? That's like the craziest thing I've ever heard.
I love it.
Years and years later, it took me to realize this guy, he got it, right? Which is that, Mao was, and that patriotism and loyalty to the country and all that was a huge part of what Mao was pushing.
That's
and
the mass line in America.
Yeah, it was going to the poorest of the poor and saying, we want a better country. We love the country, and it's time to come together and build an association to make our country strong and great again. And that's something that Western leftists just don't get. That you're 20-year-old with the Trotsky t-shirt or whatever, which was me at one point. Like, they've got photo evidence of it. They just don't get that. And it's going to be a while. And I think, as history moves at a faster pace now because information travels very rapidly, but things in the United States are continuing to get worse and worse and worse. And it will get to the point that real communism is going to take off in America. I'm very confident of that.
Putin said in a recent speech that when he looks at the United States today, he sees a lot of parallels between the last days of the Soviet Union. And I don't think he was wrong.
No, I don't. I don't think he was wrong either.
It gets back to that out of control corruption that destroyed their beautiful country. And it's trying to destroy our beautiful country. And I have one question. I know you got to go, but this has been burning in my soul, Caleb, and I have to ask you. I posted a thread about it and I think I tagged you, but here's what I don't understand. How is it that there are people in the United States and in other countries who call themselves communists, yet they support the Nazis in Ukraine instead of Russia?
Yeah.
Make that make sense.
That is the question.
Yeah, well, I mean, it shouldn't make any sense because, I mean, every single communist government in the world supports Russia right now. The Chinese support Russia. The Vietnamese support Russia. North Korea supports Russia. Cuba supports Russia. They just built a big statue of Fidel Castro. The Cuban president was over there. Nicaragua supports Russia. Yeah. Laos, they support Russia. I mean, Belarus, where you have Lukashenko and the Communist Party is the biggest guy. Every communist government in the world supports Russia right now. But there has been such an effort to separate American leftists, to turn it into an aesthetic, to turn it into like a, it's a lot like, I think
Do they watch
nowadays,
MSNBC?
Yeah. I think nowadays a lot of, it's like, back when I was in high school, you wanted to be a punker. So you bought punk clothes and you listened to punk albums, or you wanted to be, it is turned into a brand. And Peter Coffin loves to rant about this. They've turned it into a commodified identity of like 14-year-old, likes trans people and hates their Republican parents. And so they decide I'm a communist. And so they get a communist hat and they buy some communist books and they take some communist selfies. And it's this, I don't know, it's this role
It's like
playing
kids who wear a
identity.
Nirvana shirt, but they can't name a single Nirvana song, right?
Yeah. And, if you go to, China, the Communist Party leaders are all wearing suits and ties.
Yeah.
They don't act that way. They're not dressing up like Lenin. You know what I mean? They're wearing suits and ties and they're like, we're responsible leaders trying to run the country. And that if you actually get to the essence of it, it is something different than this kind of commodified identity that has really been pushed on the internet. And that at the essence of communism, when you talk about communism, we're not talking about socialism. That's what they have around the world. They have communist governments, but they have a socialist economic system. But communism, the ultimate stage, that is a society with so much wealth and so much abundance and so much prosperity that the need for a government completely fades away, that people can just kind of take what they need and do what they feel like doing, from each according to their own ability to each according to their need. It is such a high-tech utopia. And it's based on this contradiction between technology and poverty, right? Under capitalism, the more technology advances, the poorer people get. But socialism, by having a centrally planned economy, you get rid of that. And so human progress takes off and you can get that higher stage of abundance. So the ultimate goal is a world without a government. That is the ultimate goal. And it's a goal where the fulfillment of every individual, I believe that's the way Marx put it, is the fulfillment of every individual is the fulfillment of all, meaning that people don't really have any obligation to society. There's so much out there that people, they talk about labor becomes life's prime want rather than a necessity, meaning people work because they're, they don't want to be bored, basically. There's no, it's not necessary because technology has advanced so much. And that kind of high tech utopia, I actually hear a lot of libertarians talk about.
I was going to say, that sounds very libertarian.
Yeah.
We talk about that a lot.
Yeah, and that is the goal.
That's our ideal world in many ways.
Yeah. So I guess I just wanted to end with that. So I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm going to have you on my channel soon, Lori. Absolutely. And I'm going to have Tyler back on again soon as well.
All right.
So yeah, good luck. I'm sure this conversation will continue to go great places. I'm going to be on tonight at 11:30. I'm doing a late night stream tonight. So I'll catch you all later.
All right, buddy. We'll be there.
See you soon. Yep.
Take care, my friend.
Bye-bye. Good to see you, Caleb.
Yeah, I was going to add
something else.
He is, man. He is. I'm so glad I found that dude. I mean,
tell me how you found Caleb. I'm so curious.
I'd love to. So I'll give you my political
tell me your story.
Background for a second. So I remember being 17. I was in high school in 2004, and I remember maybe it was 2003. And I remember the war in Iraq, and I wasn't very political, but I was a kid. I always wanted to be able to participate in the adult conversations, but I had no idea where to start. You know what I mean? How do you start learning about politics in America? I didn't really read much history outside of what I knew at that time, at least. And I remember in my gut hoping that George Bush Jr. would win, because all I was being fed was American propaganda, and I'm glad that I felt that way, because I know how most people feel. I know how normies feel. You're being influenced by the media. You don't really know where to start. You don't have any independent leg of information to stand on.
I'm just curious, how old were you when 9/11 happened?
I was 14.
So you remember it clearly. And
I remember it. I was in 8th grade. I went home. I turned on the TV. I laid on my mom's bed and watched it on her little 14-inch TV. And I watched the towers, and everyone seemed very concerned. And there was just this weird anxiety that I felt. But I wasn't political, so I didn't know. I was just like, this is bad, I guess. This is scary.
So it makes sense that you would then support.
Yeah, they were like, this bad guy's over here.
George Bush. I mean, we want to go get those bad guys who did this to us.
And I had good teachers that were like liberals, honestly, and were for Kerry, and they didn't say it out loud, but I could kind of tell that it was cool not to be on George Bush's side, but I could still feel in my gut like it was like this fear, like oh, it's probably just, leave with the horse you rode in on, maybe just one more term. And then after that, the next 4 years, I started getting very political. Bill Hicks was my way in. Bill Hicks,
Really?
George Carlin.
That makes
Yeah,
so much sense. That's why I like you
yeah.
so much.
Bill Hicks mainly. Bill
You
Hicks,
were
I always,
baptized by Bill
yeah.
Hicks and George Carlin.
I was,
Right
and I
on.
was raised Christian. So anytime I hear something, my dad was a Southern Baptist preacher. So I immediately go, is that Christian? Is that what Jesus would do? Always, with everything.
Wow.
And Bill Hicks started getting on stage and saying that too.
He did.
He was like, I was like, oh, you can. I remember telling my dad, I did stand-up comedy a couple times, and I told my dad, I was like, stand-up comedy is just preaching without an altar call.
That's right. You're preaching in a bar to a bunch of drunks instead of a church.
Absolutely. It's beautiful. And Hicks would just say, is that Christian? His whole thing, like, I don't like what you said up there, buddy. I'm gonna do something about it. And he goes, well, you said you're a Christian, right? Yeah. Well, then forgive me.
There was always that strong undercurrent of Christianity in Bill's comedy. And that's exactly why he went to Waco. He and Kevin Booth, my friend Kevin Booth, they took a camera on the spur of the moment when the standoff started with feds, and they went to Waco and they stayed there for, I think, a few days and just, tried to get a good shot of the compound, as they called it, a church. And Bill was one of the first to point out, hey, that's not a compound, that's a church.
Yeah, I've honestly never really thought about it like that until I just talked to you. I just looked at
it was a church where they lived. They had living quarters.
They burnt kids alive in a church.
But it
the
was
Democratic Party did under Bill Clinton.
They sure did. And the right wing, I have to give Alex Jones a shout out and some credit. I've known Alex for a long time too.
I like Alex.
I do too. He's a very likable guy when you get to see him.
He's done more good than harm.
And one of the good things he did that I want to give him a shout out for was he started in 1997 when he was on a local radio station in Austin. It was a station called KJFK. Great call letters. KJFK FM. That's where he got his start. And he started a campaign to rebuild the Branch Davidian Church. Even though there were only a handful of survivors from the fire, there were only, I think, 7 or 10 left to worship, but they needed a church. I mean, the federal government burned down everything on that property. It was just scorched earth, right? So they needed a place to worship. They couldn't just go to some other church because they've got their own brand of Seventh-day Adventism. And he started a fundraising drive and a labor drive. And I went up there several times, and so did others. We drove up to Waco on the weekends. We'd bring materials. People donated materials. And it took us, I think, about 6 months to build them a new church. Small, wasn't big like the compound they used to have, but it was like a little, country church. And we built that with our own hands so that they could have a place to worship again. And I wanted to tell Caleb while he was on the stream, because I know he worked with Ramsey Clark. Ramsey Clark was there for that. He was a big support. I think he represented some of the accused Branch Davidians who survived the fire, if I remember correctly. And when we rebuilt the church, Ramsey came out and gave the dedication address in the year 2000, I believe it was. He was there, and I will always be grateful to Ramsey Clark for that.
He sounds like a great guy. I need to learn more about him.
Yeah, I study a lot of the Johnson and Kennedy years when Ramsey was in the government, and he was one of the good guys. One of the good guys.
Well, I'll bring you up to speed to today. So I got into Bill Hicks and George Carlin, and I'll embarrass myself a little bit. 2008, I was at this very conservative Christian school, and I was approached by my liberal history teacher, and he goes, hey, do you want to make the administration angry and start a Democrat club on campus? And I said, well, who would be in it? And he's like, you. I go, well, who else?
And so who else?
It was me and one other guy who was an atheist at a Christian school. He was my vice president. And in 2008, I debated for Barack Obama in this Christian school. I mean, it was a hostile environment. The dean was on the front row. They just had Newt Gingrich there. And I mean, I'm still proud of myself. I about peed my pants. There's a video of it online that I went through before. I said from Obama is hope to Stalin is based was the name of it. But I mean, you know what happened after that.
Wow.
Obama was a huge disappointment. Matt
Yeah.
Taibbi encapsulates it more than anybody. He immediately sold out people that looked like him. As Michael
That's right.
Hudson says, he
That's
told the
right.
Wall Street tycoons, I'm the only thing standing between you and the pitchforks. So he
Mhm.
ran on hope and change, and then he kicked 5 million black people out of their homes.
Yep.
Right. And made the stock market look like a hockey stick,
Mhm.
you know. And so I was completely disappointed by that guy. And I remember, I think it was 2012, I was in grad school. I Googled socialism because everyone was calling Obama a socialist. And I was like, well, let's see what this is. So I started reading it, and real quick, I found out this guy's not a socialist.
Yeah, definitely not.
So, but this doesn't sound so bad. And then it kind of clicked with me. That's why they've hidden this from me my whole life. They don't want anyone looking into this at all, you know?
Mm.
And then, so I kind of started looking into it. I would never look into communism or Marxism but I saw there were like ways you could dip your toe in the water, like anarcho-communism or libertarian communism. And I went all the way down that rabbit
Yes, there
hole.
is such a thing.
I was reading Rudolph Rocker. I read almost all of Murray Bookchin. I read all of Oechelon. I read all of it. And like, but and then Bernie Sanders happened, and I was 100% behind Bernie. I didn't have much money, but I was by this time ridiculously in college debt from going to grad school, and Bernie was going to fix it. And I was like, well, look, cool. Bernie's a socialist. I was listening to Richard Wolff and stuff like that. And then Bernie, after WikiLeaks came out, I was like, awesome. You got them dead to rights, dude. Dead to rights. They're screwing you over. Like, you need to run. Like Jill Stein was like, hey, Bernie, let's run third party,
Let's go
baby.
third party. Let's go independent. I remember that.
Let's do it. And I would have been at the barricades with that dude. And then he goes, actually, y'all should vote for Hillary Clinton. And I'm like,
no.
Record scratch.
Yeah.
What? And he never mentioned these WikiLeaks documents. Julian Assange is like forfeiting his freedom for you. And you are just stabbing him in the back. And the best answer I've ever heard was from Chris Hedges, who said I don't want to end up like Ralph Nader.
Yeah.
So you're a sellout.
And a coward.
Like your comfy lake house. You are what the Republicans said you are, you know?
Yes.
And from 2016 to 2020, I listened to a lot of Chapo, and I really do think they are a psyop. And they brainwashed me into trying Bernie 2020. What else are we going to do? And I knew it was a lost cause at that point. But I was using it as a social experiment, an experiment with myself. I will fully commit to this in 2020 just to prove to myself that communism is the only way that my politics will ever work in this country, because they're not going to let you do it inside the system. So I did everything for Bernie. I think I gave him $5,000. I called 1,000 people on his phone app. 1,000.
Wow.
There was a little counter. I called 1,000 people. I drove to Houston, Missouri, and knocked on 47 doors out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I was like that. One dude had a shotgun. I mean, I went above and beyond for you, Bernie. And then what'd you do?
Damn near got shot for you, Bernie.
Then what's his name? Yeah, exactly. Obama tells what's her face, Klobuchar and Buttigieg to drop out. They literally had an app called the Shadow app screwing you over, and they stab you in the back, and then you go around again and tell people to vote for Joe Biden. You fraud. You absolute fraud. And then right after that, like the only person I could find that made any sense, because a lot of people were like, well, I guess we just got to support Biden. And even people that didn't support Biden, it was obvious to me that they still did, kind of.
Yeah.
And I think because they live in liberal centers, they live in like New York City, or they live in California, or it's just easier for them to be like, yeah, he's going to sell us out. But, you know, all my friends,
That's how it was with Clinton in the 90s. That's what my generation went through before your generation went through that with Obama and then Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, our hero, our anti-hero of that generation was Ralph Nader. when he took on the Democratic Party machine and ran for president. Was he run 4 times? I think 96, 2000, 04, and 08. I think was his last run. And I love Ralph Nader. He was so important in our country and what he did, and one of the few on the left who really did put up a fierce resistance to the Democratic Party. But unfortunately, Ralph's been disappointing me in the last few years. He seems to have a bad brain worm about Russia.
Yeah.
He got Trump derangement syndrome, and then he got Putin derangement syndrome. And
why do you think me and you are 2 rule people? I'd call us I'm afraid to even use words anymore. I was going to show this. I know. Well, it's every word is Orwellian. I was going to say we're both progressives, but then I was like, whoa, I don't want to say that out loud. But we're forward-thinking people, if you will. Everything's Orwellian.
We're heartland people.
We're heartland people. And Johnny said this earlier about your commie professor. You didn't drop names. And I was going to say, unlike Orwell, who did drop names.
Right.
But why do you think? I still can't really wrap my mind around Trump derangement syndrome. And I know you swim in this all day long.
Yep.
How can they just completely throw out 50 years of like protecting the First Amendment? I don't understand. The one I respect the most is Sam Harris, because he'll just say, we needed to rig it to win because Donald Trump's the most evil man since Hitler.
At least he was honest, right? About that.
I respect their honesty.
I don't know. I saw it happening in 2016, 2015, of course. From the day that Trump announced his run, they were trying to call him a racist. And the crazy thing is, I'm old enough to remember the 70s and 80s and 90s when the mainstream media and the establishment loved Donald Trump. He was always on the front page of the New York Times.
He was in Home Alone too.
Yeah, I mean, he was like, he was everybody's favorite guy, and in many ways, he was a New York Democrat in those years. There are some strange similarities actually between Donald Trump and Franklin Roosevelt, if you really think about it.
I haven't ever thought about that, but that's a fun thing to think about.
Isn't that a fun thing to think about? Because they were both New Yorkers, both elites from
both kind of class traders.
They were both class traders. That's right. Yep. And both, especially during COVID, Trump brought in some sweeping aid programs for the people that were pretty socialist. It was pretty New Deal what he came up with. He gave us at least a taste of temporary Medicare for all, as long as the treatment was for COVID. It was covered by the federal government. He brought us the eviction moratorium, which saved a lot of people from living in tents. Even though it was later struck down by the Supreme Court, Trump brought us that. And he used his executive power to do it because there just wasn't time for Congress to save people in the nick of time before they became homeless. Of course, since the Supreme Court struck that down, did you notice how much bigger the tent cities are getting? Just this year, since they struck down the eviction moratorium, and the evictions are going forward. And I keep asking myself, where are all the good communists? Where are all the good socialists? Because when we went through a Great Depression in this country before, you guys were there. You guys were out in the streets stopping those evictions. And when the sheriff put somebody's belongings on the curb, you carried them back in the house. And we need you now. You see these tent cities out here. We've got to do something about that.
Well, I really do think CPI is the ember of that rekindling again. I think the real difference, I don't know how it was in the 30s. I know Caleb could speak much more intelligently about it, but I don't think there was this mix up. I don't think they'd had 100 years to perfect this Orwellian language.
Right.
To run MK Ultra, Operation Mockingbird. I mean, you call someone a communist now, you don't think the guy that helps the poor person down the street not be evicted. Like that was in the 30s. They'd say, we're going to go get the communists. And the landlords were actually angry. They were scared. Now you say you're going to go get the communists and you're like the weird girl with the purple hair and the rainbow flag. Like, what do you mean?
Exactly.
She's probably going to help kick him out because
flag and calls
she's like, They're
Like,
white. Get them out. Put a black family in there. Racists.
yeah.
You know, this is the modern. It's, you know, and the thing that I've always been looking for, it's very messed up how they call it. I hate the term class reductionist, Lori. Oh, you're a
What
class
does that even
reductionist.
mean?
It means the
Explain
main
that.
thing I care about is class. The main thing I care about is how much economic power do you have? Does the major corporation and the boss that runs it have his boot on your neck? He's got it on mine too, brother. Then let's bond together and get his boot off our neck. I don't care if you're gay, straight, trans, black, purple. I really don't care. And they go, oh, well, you're a class reductionist. And I think really what it is, Lori, is it's almost impossible to get a college professorship without going into some kind of woke identity. And Angela Davis really proves it. I mean, she was the last person that ran with I think it was Gus Hall on the Communist Party ticket in 1984.
Yeah, we were just talking about that recently.
She went out. I shouldn't wear scarves like this because I look like Angela, but you know, she's always on the TV talking about intersectionality and the 16 different things that we need to focus on. The main thing you need to focus on, Angela, is class.
What happened to her?
Class.
She's another one that disappointed me. Like
she started hanging out with Oprah. You know, like I haven't been hanging out with Oprah.
Hell no.
I work at Walmart on the weekend.
That's right.
You know,
that's right. No, that's why we have to come together. There's strength in numbers. I truly believe that. I feel that there's a revolution coming in America. I want this to be a peaceful revolution. On my own show, on Maverick News, and on my own channel, I'm always talking about, I'm trying to calm the anger that's legitimately out there for good reason that people have towards their government. But I see a lot of my fellow Americans starting to stock up on their firearms and ammo, and they're getting ready for a armed showdown with the government. Or there's, you know, especially after the Dark Brandon speech, right? Where Biden comes out and basically calls the MAGA movement a bunch of terrorists, and, you know, then raids Mar-a-Lago with his FBI and starts using the power of the state in a very fascist way to crush his competition. Of course, the other side's angry. We saw that on January 6th. And what I fear is that next time they'll bring their guns. Next time it'll be a real insurrection. I think January 6th was a warning. I think that was a warning shot. Most of them came unarmed. I don't know of a single firearm that was brought in by any of the protesters. You know, they didn't come.
Well, Ashley Babbitt was the only person that got murdered by a firearm, right?
That's exactly right.
So
exactly right.
And I think there was a lot of nefarious, you know, plants, if you will. FBI happened. But honestly,
the Federal Bureau of Infiltration, man, that's what they do.
I trust my crazy right-wing neighbor with the gun more than I do the Joe Biden administration.
Hell yeah.
I'll be honest. 100%.
Hell yeah.
Where's my view on the news? It doesn't exist. So that's why I started doing this, because I was just like,
me too.
No one's saying this, you know? It's just like, oh, they're just crazy, or like, what's that? One of those tweets leaked of the guy that was running Twitter, and he's like, this is why we kick the people off from a flyover country, because, you know, they vote for a racist tangerine. And I was like, yeah, that is how you guys see us.
That's how they look at us. Know? They hate us.
But, you know, as Mal said, the countryside surrounds the cities. And I'm right there with you. I mean, I don't think any communist. I love that Caleb taught me that and preaches that, because it's true. Like, our side, we don't want violence. We want life to be better for the working class. But we are willing to struggle. Like, we are willing to defend ourselves. You know, because I was asking Caleb the other day, like, well, how did Mao start using violence? You know, and it was because the Japanese were just committing unspeakable atrocities.
That's right.
Against everyday Chinese people. I mean, shooting kids, shooting pregnant women. And then started going after communists specifically.
So just it was, like the Nazis went after him in Russia.
So it was self-defense.
That's right.
It's
a historical fact. Absolutely true.
What
And
do you think?
I feel like sorry, you had a question?
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that I feel like a peaceful revolution is possible. I don't think it's too late. Some
I
people
don't
say
either.
it's too late, that you can't vote your way out of this.
I don't
and
either.
maybe I'm just too much of an optimist, but I would like to think that the ballot is still better than the bullet, to paraphrase Abe Lincoln.
And Malcolm
I,
X.
if we still have free and fair elections, I mean, I sometimes I look at our Congress, Tyler, and I ask myself, how does Nancy Pelosi still have a job? She's like
That's,
the most unpopular
I mean,
Congress critter. And yet the people of her district must think she's great because she keeps winning elections. And
well, aren't they
Chuck
all like
Schumer,
rich Silicon Valley, like
that's her
bourgeois?
district. That's her
Yeah.
district. So
So
that,
that
yeah,
makes
I
sense.
mean,
But
those are
I mean,
probably fair and
I
honest elections
I
there.
said forever, and I'm going to be very careful how I say what I'm about to say. But
This is YouTube.
I've been amazed for years, and this is why I pray for Nancy Pelosi, because I've been amazed for years that Nancy could like leave the house. You pick up what I'm laying down? And then the hammer issue happened, and it appears that was a late night
Party gone wrong?
What can you say? I don't know. Can you
Really
say
wrong.
what's the way to say it?
Delicately.
Yes. Paul was having an interesting evening out in San Francisco with another man. Let's say it like that.
They tried to say that guy was a Trump supporter.
Yeah.
It turns out, yeah, he was like some homeless guy living in a
I love
park,
the police report was they showed up and they said Paul answered the door very calmly and the man was standing behind him calmly. And then
they knew each other.
Absolutely.
They had to.
They had a disagreement over money and the hammer started flying. But Nancy is, I guess she's out now, right? I got to recalibrate my entire.
Well, she's out as speaker.
Have you seen Hakeem Jeffries talk about the notorious B.I.G. on the floor of the Senate?
No.
Can I show you this real quick?
Yeah, have you got the video? I got to
God.
see that. Really?
I got to make, you know how all the big people have a little run-in video for their streams, and I think I'm going to work this into mine somehow. This is one of the most every time I watch it I feel like I need to shower afterwards. Every single time. This was put up 5 years ago. So this is Pelosi's replacement, and I mean it couldn't be more perfect. It really couldn't. So
how did I miss
if you like hip hop at all, this will make you want to go take a bath.
Oh God.
I thank the distinguished gentleman from Maryland for yielding. It was all a dream. I used to read Word Up magazine, Salt and Pepper and Heavy D up in the limousine, hanging pictures on my wall. Every Saturday, Rap Attack, Mr. Magic, Marley Marl. Those were the words of the late, great, notorious B.I.G. Biggie Smalls, Frank White, the king of New York. He died 20 years ago today in a tragedy that occurred in Los Angeles. But his words live on forever. I've got the privilege of representing the district where Biggie Smalls was raised. We know he went from negative to positive and emerged as one of the world's most important hip-hop stars. His rags to riches life story is the classic embodiment of the American dream. Biggie Smalls is gone, but he will never be forgotten. Rest in peace, notorious B.I.G. Where Brooklyn at?
Oh, I'm glad I watched it till the end. So you
Boy,
could
is
hear,
that, that's a guy who's serious about tackling the problems of the American people right
you
there.
saw the one right where he gave
me
the
a
speech
break.
and it was from A to Z, like every word he said started with a different letter. Did you see that one?
Yeah. I mean, he
My
fancies
Lord.
himself a rapper, doesn't
It
he?
is literally kabuki theater. I mean, what are they doing up there? And then they were all
Unbelievable.
giggling, like, "Oh, that's so funny." Ha.
Your tax dollars at work.
Your tax dollars at work.
You're paying this guy to do clown shit like that.
Hey,
Right?
no offense taken, Lionel. No offense taken. He said that guy sounds like a teacher.
Ah,
I always
he is.
I like to learn
He meant Jeffries, not you.
yeah. This might be a good one. Lionel asked this for me. He said, "Why are a lot of libertarian think tanks full of conservatives?"
Well, the party was founded in part by conservatives, the Koch brothers. From the origins of the Libertarian Party, it was really kind of a reaction to Nixon. When we were founded in 1972, the more conservative wing of the party, the Republican Party, felt that Nixon was not conservative enough because at that time he was trying to achieve more détente. There was the outreach to China, diplomatic relations with China, which really infuriated a lot of the neocons. And yeah, something I don't understand in more recent years, to bring it up to the current situation, is after the 2016 election, because I've been a libertarian for 27 years, we've always had a lot of people on the left in our party as well, people like me. But after Trump won, a strange thing happened. We picked up a lot of Trump supporters in the Libertarian Party. And I wondered why. I was like, but you guys already took over the Republican Party. In a lot of ways, Trump is just an outgrowth of the Ron Paul revolution and the Tea Party. Right. And so they kicked the neocons out of power in the Republican Party in 2016, and they took over the Republican Party. So then I was like, well, why are you in the Libertarian Party? You're in a bigger party over here. Why do you need us? And I still don't understand that one to this day. I mean, a lot of libertarians like Trump. A lot of libertarians did vote for Trump. But I don't understand why they're joining the Libertarian Party, because our platform is quite different from Trump's. And we criticize Trump very heavily for a lot of the things that he did, including, we're very tough critics on Trump.
I also think Trump was just disappointment with Obama, the huge, I always think of that clip where Obama was making fun of him at that dinner. Do you remember that? And Trump's
and the look on Trump's face. He's like, I'm gonna get you.
Yeah, I can't remember who said it, what comedian. I think it was Bill Burr. He said, that guy, he was sitting in the audience going, I'm gonna take the president's job. And then he did it.
Right. And then he did. Despite all their efforts not to let him.
Say what you will. And I know if you look into Trump, and everyone scoffs at it as ridiculous, but I know Trump's into positive thinking. And, I saw the other day that the 24, let me show you real quick. Well, I've been really enjoying this one. And this is a little bit older, but I think you'll like it. Here you go. Is it still showing up? No,
I can't see it yet.
Okay, here we go. 24 things.
Do it like me. Nobody can do it like me. Honestly.
Nobody's stronger than me.
Nobody has better toys than I do.
There's nobody bigger or better at the military than I am.
Nobody loves the Bible more than I do.
Nobody builds walls better than me.
Nobody's better to people with disabilities than me. Nobody's fighting for the veterans like I'm fighting for the veterans.
There's nobody that's done so much for equality as I have.
There's nobody more pro-Israel than I am. There's nobody more conservative than me.
There is nobody that respects women more than I do. Nobody would be tougher on ISIS than Donald Trump.
Because nobody's ever had crowds like Trump has had.
There's nobody that understands the horror of nuclear better than me. And nobody even understands it but me. It's called devaluation, the sale of the uranium that nobody knows what it means. I know what it means. Nobody knows what that means. Nobody knows the game better than I do.
Oh, God.
This country has ever known so much about infrastructure as Donald Trump.
I know the H-1B. I know the H-2B. Nobody knows it better than me.
Nobody knows politicians better than I do.
Nobody knows more about taxes than I do.
Nobody knows more about debt than I do. Nobody knows the system better than me, which is why I alone can fix it.
I just love that.
That's beautiful.
You know,
That's so true.
Oh, it's going on to something. Get that off there.
I
But
know everything. Nobody understands this thing better than me.
how is that guy talking to himself in his head? You know what I mean?
That's exactly what he probably says to himself.
Is he saying, because my default growing up was like, oh, I probably shouldn't do that. You know, if I do that, somebody's going to make fun of me, and I just better not. He is not saying that. He's constantly all day long saying, I'm the best, I can do it. And here's the overlap, Lori, that I find. Like on my side, they all kind of act like if we just get the right philosophy or the right system, then everything will just work. I think there's something deeper than that. And this goes in with your, can we do this revolution peacefully, right? I think that how Mao was talking to himself in his head, or Stalin or Lenin or any of these people, Che Guevara, was pretty similar to how Donald Trump is talking in his head right there.
Right.
And I think there's a lot to be said for how you talk to yourself in your head. You know, like before I did this interview with you and Caleb, I made a little short and I said, I'm incredibly nervous. I'm about to talk to two people I really respect, right? It would be easier to just not do this. Say, you know, I got some stuff going on. I'm not going to be able to make it tonight. And then I don't have to face the anxiety.
I feel that.
Of someone on here saying, you know, the comments have been pretty nice. Nice.
Thank y'all for being nice.
You know, you got one guy says, well, I'm glad I'm your favorite psyop.
Oh, well, it's
buddy,
Mr. Gottlieb. What do you expect from him?
What do you expect from Sydney?
Right.
You know, and every once in a while you'll get a hater too. But, you know, I don't know about your spiritual bent or if that's something you feel comfortable talking about at all. But for me, and I've wanted to do a stream where I just kind of talk about this as, I feel like we're all little, I don't know. Here's how I see it. You know, have you ever seen those mushrooms that are like really, really long, big, like one of the biggest organisms in the world, and they're all connected under the ground?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then they kind of like shoot out in different places.
Yeah.
Like, I really feel that's on my spiritual side. I feel that's kind of how humans are. And we're all connected underneath. We're all expressions of God, of the divine. But if we're not afraid, we got to not be afraid to stick our little selves up out of the soil and be who we are, you know, hit record and talk to somebody you really respect and put it out there. And just, I think the first video I ever made on this channel was about choosing courage, you know, choosing courage, because, okay, like you can have this perfect political plan. And it made me kind of realize why you're in the Libertarian Party, because you looked around for a party you could join that would actually do something. Yes. And that's why you're in there. Mm-hmm. Like I go, oh, that makes sense, you know. But
it solved my problem of being politically homeless. And
right.
And I knew both the two parties were completely corrupt and no good. So the Libertarian Party made a lot more sense to me than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I just to round that up real quick, it's just, you know, we can't be afraid to put ourselves out there. And I really do think that when you try something, you know, God will open doors for you. Who knows?
I totally believe that. I mean, I'm a Christian too, and I've seen that happen again and again and again in my own life. I've seen God open those doors. It's why we're here talking to each other right now.
Absolutely.
You know, God brings people together. You meet the people you're supposed to meet in this life. I truly believe that everyone we meet is here to teach us something, good or bad, that everything's a lesson in this world. And it's like what Caleb is preaching, and you too, he's always saying, you got to love the people. Even the people that you disagree with, you gotta love them. You've got to show that you got to try to understand where they're coming from. You've got to love them. You got to make them feel included, supported. And, you know, it's the problem is, especially amplified in the Trump years, is all this hate. It's like it's cool to hate again. After we spent, it's undone all this good work that we did over the last several generations in terms of, you know, race equality. I'm lucky. I feel very blessed to be part of Gen X because we were the first, I think, truly first colorblind generation. We were the first kids that were bused to school. I remember as a little kid, you know, when busing came around and there were all these protests at the bus stop with all these racist parents with their little picket signs saying, I don't want my white kid riding the bus with some black kid. And we were the kids.
Is communism.
And we're just like, but we like each other. I mean, this is my friend Shaniqua.
Yeah.
And this is my friend Kim, who's Vietnamese. I grew up in a neighborhood that was like when Caleb did that Asian forum the other night. It was excellent. And again, that's been a problem in more recent years of all this, you know, the old anti-Asian discrimination is coming back again. Americans have always had a bug in their brain about Asians, which I can't explain. But my best friends,
I'm married to one. So.
I love that. She Vietnamese?
She's Hmong.
Oh, lovely!
Interesting
I
history.
dated a Hmong fellow once. Yes, wonderful.
Yeah, they're
wonderful
fun.
people. Wonderful. I got a thing for Asian guys. I'm not gonna lie.
I got a thing for Asian girls. So
I love that. We have that in common.
We bring it together.
But yeah, I mean, our generation grew up without seeing color. It didn't even matter. Yeah, we didn't give a what color you were. We didn't care. We were interested in learning about your culture. We hung out together. I mean, in the 80s, I was one of the first white kids on my block to be playing rap records because I was hanging out with all the black kids who had all the cool rap records. And they were turning me on to stuff. And I was turning them on to stuff.
Huge hip hop head. That was I always tell the kids I was going to be the next Eminem, and it didn't quite work out. That's where all this recording equipment. That's where all this recording equipment really came from.
That's why you got the sweet Shure mic.
I bought all this to be Eminem, and then I thought, well, you know, I'll settle for the next Bob Dylan, and that didn't really work out either. But I had all this laying around, and I met Caleb. Well, that's the thing with me is like I really do think courage is contagious. There's that great video. Have you ever seen the video about the one guy that starts it and then people start following him? Have you ever seen that?
Probably not.
Let me show you. I know I've showed you too many videos, but I'll show you
one. I like it. I like doing video clips.
How to start a movement. This was an old TED Talk from like 10 years ago. And I'll show you this, and then we'll get out of here at the 2-hour mark.
All righty.
So let me figure out. I feel like StreamYard, it does things that should require like half as many clicks. But I think
the share screen's kind of a pain. I think
they're just trying to save you. And they do say that it works best with two screens, you know. So you can just share that screen over there. But I shared this with Caleb and he really liked it. And this is what Caleb did for me. Like when I went to that CPI Kansas meeting, I knew I was on video and I knew if the feds are monitoring us at all. Well, I'm on the list now, which I remember Russell Brand talking to Edward Snowden, and Snowden was like, Russell, you definitely have a file now, Russell, because you talked to me. And Russell's like, oh, I was a little nervous, but then I thought, do I want to live the kind of life where I don't have a file or the kind where I do for a good reason?
That's a great question. That's a great way to look at it.
Man, that's what I want, a good kind of file. I want a Martin Luther King, Albert Einstein, James Baldwin kind of file.
Excuse me.
You know?
Yeah, I want, someday, 50 years after I'm gone, I want them to declassify my FBI file, and I
Exactly.
hope it's good. I hope y'all enjoy
Well,
it.
I never want Bobby D to die because I love him so
I'm a
much, but
historian who digs through declassified documents all day, you know. So I'd like that. To me, that's making history. If they have an FBI file on you, you've done something right.
Amen. Amen. And like I said, I never want Bobby to go. I want as many albums out of Bob as possible, but man, his FBI file is going to be juicy. The Bob
Can you
Dylan
imagine?
FBI
Oh,
file.
yeah.
Because I think you'll see why he went out of politics. Because you know, I think he was probably next on the Martin Luther King list. You know, I think that's why Stokely Carmichael took out. I know they surely were like, should we knock Bob off? I don't know. I'm sure they thought about it. So anyway, I want to show you this. This is what Caleb did for me.
So, ladies and gentlemen, at TED, we talk a lot about leadership and how to make a movement. So let's watch a movement happen, start to finish, in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons from it. First, of course, you know, a leader needs the guts to stand out and be ridiculed. But what he's doing is so easy to follow. So here's his first follower with a crucial role. He's going to show everyone else how to follow.
I want to be that
Notice
guy.
that the leader embraces him as an equal. So now it's not about the leader anymore.
And that's what
it's
Caleb's
about them,
done for me.
plural. Now there he is calling to his friends. Now if you notice that the first follower is actually an underestimated form of leadership in itself. It takes guts to stand out like that. The first follower is what transforms a lone nut into a leader. And here comes a second follower. Now it's not a lone nut, it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd, and a crowd is news. So a movement must be public. It's important to show not just the leader, but the followers, because you find that new followers emulate the followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, and immediately after, 3 more people. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point. Now we've got a movement.
There you go. There's communism in America.
Notice that as more people join in, it's less risky. So those that were sitting on the fence before now have no reason not to. They won't stand out. They won't be ridiculed, but they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. So over the next minute, you'll see all of the those that prefer to stick with the crowd, because eventually they would be ridiculed for not joining in. And that's how you make a movement. But let's recap some lessons from this. So first, if you are the type, like the shirtless dancing guy, that is standing alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals. So it's clearly about the movement, not you. Okay, but we might have missed the real lesson here. The biggest lesson, if you noticed, did you catch it? Is that leadership is over-glorified. That yes, it was the shirtless guy was first, and he'll get all the credit, but it was really the first follower that transformed the lone nut into a leader. So as we're told that we should all be leaders, that would be really ineffective. If you really care about starting a movement, have the courage to follow and show others how to follow. And when you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first one to stand up and join in. And what a perfect place to do that, TED. Thanks.
Wow.
Pretty cool,
profound.
isn't it?
You know, it explains, I couldn't think of a better place to end than Caleb's trials and tribulations that he's been through this year. You know, as I told you at the beginning of the stream, I've been supporting Caleb since 2015. I remember him from Occupy Wall Street. We didn't even get a chance to talk about that, but I was covering Occupy Wall Street, and so was he. We were just in different parts of the country, and someday we'll have to touch on that. But I wasn't really born to follow. I've always been kind of a born leader, but I recognize leadership when I see it. I think Caleb has amazing leadership qualities, always did. When he started CPI, I was so excited with what he was doing. As I looked into CPI, I liked the message that he was preaching, you know, to his flock. And I saw so many people who were once his allies not so long ago turn on him quite unfairly. And I wasn't going to do that. I had the courage to follow, even though I'm not a communist. I agree with so much of what he's doing. I think he's making a positive difference in the world. And that's why I wasn't going to abandon him over some stupid bullshit about his sex
Amen.
life. Who
Amen.
cares?
That's what
Who
I said.
cares?
People were tweeting me literally like, it's all true, Tyler. And I go, what's all true? It's all true. And I go, dude, I don't care. Like, are you going to
Even
take
if it
on,
was, I
dude,
wouldn't care.
are you going to take on the FBI and the CIA? If
I'm
you
a
are, buddy,
libertarian.
they're
Live and
gonna,
let live.
yeah,
Do
they're
what you want in your
absolutely
bedroom.
gonna
Just
come
don't
for
tell
you,
me.
brother.
I don't want to know.
And the ultimate thing was, they say, do you know about it? I go, yeah, I'm a Christian, so I forgave him.
There you go.
Now what?
There you go.
And you should do the same, or else that's hate on your heart, you know. But I love him. He's one of the only people doing it, and
Really doing it.
really doing it for real. He's
Really
bringing back
doing it.
that 1930s.
Really organizing.
And you know, I think the crowd
Yeah.
will catch on, and he sees it. He's got the vision, and
And
I-
the courage.
the
Like that
courage.
talk
It's
just said,
all about
courage is
courage.
so important. It's all
I
about
really do
courage.
think it is. I think, you know, the members of the inner party, if you will. I'm reading 1984 in journalism class with my students, so it's in my mind. But
Excellent.
the inner party in America, what is it? 500,000 people, you think? 500,000 people? You know, we get 1 million people that genuinely care about their fellow man. And, you know, I hope a gun is never raised. I hope everyone finds the Lord in this country, including Nancy Pelosi. And we just start
Absolutely.
loving our neighbors as ourselves. And we don't even need a government anymore. We don't need politics anymore because everybody just takes care of each other.
Or just a very minimal government like
Yeah,
libertarians want. We
that's
like a
that's
small
what I would
government.
prefer. You
So
know,
small you could fit it on a postage stamp.
in the meantime, while the other side is willing to organize a brutal fascist government, the politics of Caleb, and for me, communism, Marxism, Leninism seems to be the best way to protect ourselves, and it's the thing that's worked. But
I hear a
I
cricket.
have, oh, that's my
You have a
alarm.
pet cricket?
It's time to take my sleeping pill.
Ow. Okay, yeah, that's right. You got to get up early.
Oh no, that I just have it set all the time. I try to get in the groove of taking a melatonin and help reset my cycle. So
Melatonin gives me bad dreams, dude.
sometimes they're fun though. If you
Yeah, it
lean
gives you
into
really
'em,
wild
a little bit of
dreams.
that Jungian craziness.
It will put your ass to sleep, though.
It will. It'll
If you
knock
have
you
trouble
out.
getting to sleep, it'll put your ass to sleep. But I have the weirdest dreams. I had to stop taking it. On the subject of courage, I wanted to close out. You know, John F. Kennedy is my favorite president of the 20th century, and I'm studied his life a great deal. You know, he wrote a book called Profiles in Courage. And he once said of courage, and I think it's so true, that courage is being scared to death to do something and then doing it anyway.
Doing it anyway. I always think of the boys at Normandy. They were all that scene in Saving Private Ryan. They're all pissing their
Yes.
pants. And they go ahead
Yes.
and storm the beach. You know,
You know, I've been watching, I don't know if you saw, have you ever seen The Unknown War?
I
Do you know
haven't.
what that is?
Mm-mm.
Okay, I'll tell you the story real quick because it's so
Okay.
good. In 1978, Burt Lancaster, the actor Burt Lancaster, got together. He had this idea to make a documentary series about World War II, but specifically just the war between Germany and Russia.
Mm.
And it's a 20-part documentary, 20 hours long. And he did
Wow.
this with his own money. He got some backers, like-minded backers, and they traveled to the Soviet Union.
Wow.
And they got the full cooperation of the Soviet government to make
No
this.
way.
Which during the height of the Cold War is just outrageous
Wow.
that they would do that. And it was so cool. And they took the American film crew over to Russia, spent several weeks there going through the archives. And first of all, one reason to watch this is because there's footage there that you just won't see anywhere else, that you've never seen anywhere else. This comes deep from Soviet archives. During World War II, they had a camera crew of 250 men embedded with the troops. All from 1941 to August 1945, they had embedded cameramen in the action. And you've
How have
never
they hidden that from us? That sounds awesome.
Right. And we didn't get to see this until 1978.
Wow.
And 50 cameramen lost their lives making this film. 50 of them were, blown
What's
to
the name
pieces
of
on
it?
the battlefield. It's called The Unknown War. And, he got some great interviews for it. He got to talk to Brezhnev. He got to talk to Avril Harriman. And, remember that the veterans of that war, many of them were still alive in 1978. This war was a love letter to them. And most of all, it was a love letter from America to the Soviet Union for their great sacrifice. One of the nice things about this film, and why I recommend it to communists, if you haven't seen it, it's probably one of the only American-made documentaries about that war that doesn't demonize the Soviets, that glorifies their heroism, that doesn't make Stalin out to be Lucifer. It's actually really awesome. That's the one, yeah. And I've been watching it the last 2 weekends. I've been binge watching it.
Where'd you get it at?
You can get it on Tubi.
Okay.
I think it's on YouTube for a small fee.
Okay.
Amazon
20
Prime.
episodes. Oh man, I'm gonna nerd
And it's
out
like,
on that.
you can get the digitally restored version if you want to pay a little. It's also on DVD, but there's a free version on YouTube. The whole series is there for free. It's not as good a quality. Somebody taped it off the History Channel, I think, back in the 80s, but it's free and it's on Proletariat TV's channel. They're the official Communist Party of Great Britain, I believe. It's a great channel. And they have the whole thing. And it's just so amazing. I mean, footage that we Yanks had never seen.
Wow.
I'm a historian, had never seen it. And you know why I didn't see it? Because as a kid in 1978, I would have watched this. It aired on public television in the United States and the USSR. This was a huge television event in both countries. And it changed lives. You can read reviews of it on like the Internet Movie Database. I did a whole thread about it because I just thought it was such an interesting story. And I took some of the reviews of like, kids that grew up in the Soviet Union who saw this movie, and they were so blown away to see the American point of view.
Yeah.
And then American kids, it blew our minds because we were seeing the Soviet point of view for the first time.
I can't wait to watch that.
It's so cool. Tyler, you will love this. I can't recommend it highly enough. And, there's some heartbreaking stuff in there. Of course, there's a lot of death and brutality, and it's, not recommended to show your small children because it's very graphic at times. And you see things like the Shostakovich Symphony, the 7th, which they call the Leningrad Symphony. This week was the 80th anniversary of breaking the blockade of Leningrad. So had a big celebration in Russia. Putin came to lay flowers at the grave of his older brother, Victor, who died of starvation in Leningrad during the siege at age 2.
Wow.
Age 2. It's the brother he never knew. And it was extremely touching. And I just watched the episode on Leningrad. Americans have no idea what that's like to have. That'd be like the equivalent of having New York City or Washington, D.C. under siege for 2.5 years, surrounded, blockaded. You can't get food in. You can't get supplies in. People were dying of starvation in the hundreds of thousands. We'll never even really know the true death toll of Leningrad, and it affected Putin personally. This is personal for him, and I wish more of my my American friends understood that. But nothing will break your heart more than seeing, I guess in 1972, 30 years after the premiere of the Shostakovich 7th Symphony, which became, the great anthem for victory in World War II. They tried to get the original orchestra back together who had performed it during the siege of Leningrad at the same opera house in 1972, and they had a camera crew there. And almost all the seats are empty. There's just a handful. And every empty seat for the musicians who died in that war, their instrument is sitting in their seat.
I'm trying.
And the audience, like the theater's empty too, because the whole audience was dead. There's just a few people who survived the war who were at that concert in 1942. Almost all of them died during the siege of Leningrad. And another thing that really, God damn it made me cry. They had footage in the 70s of these elderly Soviet widows, putting flowers on their deceased husbands' graves who died in the war. And there's thousands of them. Thousands of these little old ladies, these little babushkas with their flowers, going to church, and their faces are so sad. And if that doesn't break your heart, I don't care how anti-Russia you are, you don't have a heart.
For sure.
You
This
don't
film
have a
broke
heart.
my heart. Have you ever seen this one? Come and
Oh,
See.
come and see.
It's on
Yes.
I can't remember his
That's a
name. He does a
wonderful
YouTube
film.
channel. He's a Russian guy that lives in the States. He was like
Powerful.
trained in Russia as a I think like a nuclear submarine specialist or something. But he was talking about, like, if you want to put yourself in the mindset of how a Russian sees war, watch this movie. And the whole movie's on YouTube, crazily. I don't know how, but at the end where the Nazis just put all the kids and everybody in that barn and just burn it and then laugh and giggle. He's like, that's why they're never going to let them come through the Ukraine again. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. So
not on my watch.
I'm super excited to watch that.
It's a great weekend binge watch. I've been watching it for the last 2 weekends, and once you get started, you can't stop.
There you
It's
go.
so good. And it's also very inspiring. Yes, it's sad, but there's also so many incredibly inspiring stories. Thanks to the cat. I'll give my cat your regards.
That's so nice.
She didn't
People
make an
saying
appearance
nice
tonight.
things.
I think she went to sleep. But yeah, check that out, folks. If you want to check it out, The Unknown War is what it's called. And I wanted to thank, I don't know if he's in the chat room tonight, but I wanted to thank Lorshek. He's a regular in Caleb's chat
love
room.
Lorshek.
He reminded me of that film. I'd forgotten all about it. Hadn't seen it in 20 years. He brought it up the other night, and I was like, I need to see that again. Because when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, what was that, 1978 or 9? They had just made this film, this remarkable bit of cooperation between America and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. They managed to make this amazing 20-part film, and a lot of American stations didn't show it. It was scheduled to air, which is probably why I didn't get to see it as a kid, because then the Soviets invaded Afghanistan and all the old Cold War sentiments popped up, and there was public outcry, and the PBS stations pulled it. They wouldn't show it. And then the film disappeared for a decade while that Soviet-Afghan war was going on. And it was only after that ended, I guess in the late 80s, that you finally started to see it pop up on places like the History Channel, A&E, back when A&E did history. And so in the 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, The Unknown War would, kind of show up on cable sometimes. And I think that's where this person taped it, the version that's on YouTube.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
it reminds me of that
censorship.
That Lucas quote where I don't know if you've ever seen that, George Lucas, they ask him, like, aren't you glad you're in America where you can have the freedom to make the movie you want and you're not in the evil Soviet Union? And he goes, actually, in the Soviet Union, you can make whatever movie you want. You have far more freedom. You just can't criticize the government. He goes, in America, if it don't make money, then it don't make sense to Hollywood. He goes,
That's right.
I'm far more constrained in this country. And,
and these days, I don't even think Hollywood can criticize the government. When was the last time you saw a film?
Now they're Hollywood inside of it. They're Top Gun too.
Really critical of the government.
Helping make it.
Right. They got the help of the CIA and the military.
Absolutely, they do. Absolutely,
the military Hollywood industrial complex.
I am so glad. Highway through the danger zone. Take us back. I was like 8.
That's
and
my generation now.
I really shouldn't say this, but when I was like 8, I realized how deep the American military propaganda was, because I had an NES joystick and I had an Atlas from like 1994. And
I got one of those.
I would open it in my bedroom floor in my little bedroom in Salem, Missouri, and I'd find Iraq, and I'd put it on and then I'd have my little joystick in the chair, and I'd be like,
Really?
like I was bombing Iraq. I was 8 years old, and then I'd watch Maverick, and I'd be like, cool, Maverick Goose, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and then I realized later on I wouldn't jump off a 15-foot high dive. So
that's something else we have in common, man. I've always dreamed of being a pilot. I just don't want to do it for the military.
Maybe just a ride. Yeah, exactly. Just give me a ride. No bombs.
I don't know if you're familiar with an account on Twitter called Donbass Revolution. Great account. They posted a poll today asking, so when World War III starts, will you fight for your country? I thought
they could never do another draft. It's over.
I had to search my soul on that one, and I said, I'm an American and I love my country, but I hate my government.
Yes, exactly. Not for this government. I'd gladly
I wouldn't
die
fight for
in a
this
war.
Government,
Probably,
and I would not fight unless we were invaded. If we were invaded, like the Soviet Union was invaded in 1941, yes, I would.
Yeah, the enemy is at home.
Right.
The war that will matter will be against your own government. That's
what's interesting. The poll's not closed yet, but last I looked at it, it was more than 80% who said no, they would not fight for their country.
And more than 80% now assume JFK was not all above board. And I know you could talk about that forever.
Oh, we need to do another live stream on that.
My friend, we're going to do 100 more of these.
I hope so. Let's make this a regular thing.
We will. And like the video, we're going to let it catch. This is one of a very friendly guy, a high school kid that watches my stuff all the time. He wants to start streaming this summer. And he said, Lori, this summer, I might want your info. I think I found you on Twitter.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. I'm real Lori Spencer on Twitter and on YouTube at Lori Spencer. And if it's okay with you, I think I'll take this live stream and put it on my channel as well, just to blast it out and get more views.
I would love for you to. I would love for you to. So that's how we'll end it. Lori, I love you. Caleb, I love you. I love everybody in America, including you, Nancy Pelosi. I pray for your soul, Hakeem Jeffries.
I pray for you, Joe Biden.
I love you. I pray for you, Joe Biden. And in the meantime, we'll figure out some of this political stuff while we all find Jesus together. Okay.
We shall overcome.
All right. Well, Lori, I'll let you go and I'll hawk my wares and then I'll hit the end broadcast button. All right.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
It's a pleasure. We're going to do it many, many more times.
Anytime.
All right.
Hit me up.
I will. Hopefully I can see you at a CPI event one day or something.
Yeah. Bring it a little closer to the heartland next time.
Absolutely. We'll do another one. We kind of hit it. We hit Chicago.
I heard Caleb was in Oklahoma City not long ago. And I'm like, how did you get here? And I didn't know you were in town.
Yep. Well, next time we're close, we'll hit you up.
Oh, yeah.
All right, my friend. This was a pleasure.
Sure was. Thank you.
I'll see you next time.
Bye now.
All right, bye-bye. Woo. All right, everybody. We did it big. It was fun. I love talking to Lori. I love talking to Caleb. What a good time. Great, great people. I could literally talk to him forever. Jenny's another one. We could talk forever. You got to hop on here sometime, Jenny. I'll show you guys. I'll put all these in the descriptions, but hawk my capitalist wares real quick here. buymeacoffee.com. This is my favorite one. And the membership tier is the bomb. But just in case you want to throw a few shekels my way, can you say that? Is that offensive? If it is, I didn't mean to. It's the first word for money that came. But hey, if they convert to US dollars, please bring them my way. And let's see here. The other one I wanted to show you. I will never hawk my own stuff without encouraging you to come and join us in the big thing that matters, which is Caleb's organization, cpi.org. And if you want to go, oh, good, Jenny. Whew, thank you. You saved me. If you want to go big, you can go straight to /join, and that'll let you join. So it's $10 a month to join CPI. I think we're one of the only organizations doing real work on the ground, having conventions. And I just love our program. We have a 4-point program. Always go over it at the end of the plan. a mass mobilization to rebuild the country, public ownership of natural resources. If God made it, you have a right to it, at least a share of it. Public control of banking. If we're going to have banking at all, it should help you. It shouldn't help the wealthy. Every religion agrees. And an economic bill of rights, which FDR said you should have a right to a job, a house, an education, health care. If we got the money, why not? If you got money to feed your kids, you should feed them. That's what I think. So that's my little spiel. I love you all. Thank you all. 15 people. This is my biggest stream ever. Thank you so much. Oh, that's kind. Hey, just whatever. It's all good. Thank you so much for staying here and listening. Your time is precious. Your time is the most important thing you have in the world. And you could have, like they say, you could have been anywhere in the internet world tonight, but you were here with me. And I appreciate that. So I love you all. Take care.